Sup guys, it's your boy DBK here. This isn't going to be so much of an opinion as this is just going to be a dictation of Immortal Technique's thoughts on the Paris attacks and on ISIS. So this is taken verbatim from his page, link in the description if you want to read it for yourselves. But I'm just going to be reading it out loud for people who may want to listen to this on the go. I don't really talk about this very often. My first language was Spanish, and second language was not actually English, it was French. I used to read books in French, and I even used to watch French cartoons. Le Monde Angleterre was my favorite. I grew up making pain au chocolat with Italian hero bread and Hershey bars, old Charles Aznavour records, and that boring old book about a petty prince trapped on a lonely planet. All with this, I studied the very long and harrowing history of the French, who were once known as the Syrian Franks. The people who carved a kingdom out of Rome's indefensible outposts in northeastern Germania, who were Christianized by the pagan conqueror Clovis and brought to empire by the Basileus, Charlemagne, Crusades, Vikings, 100 Years of War, Napoleon, Revolution, and Republic. I learned the very complex history of France, how so many incredibly beautiful things were produced there, music, arts, and philosophy. I also learned about the horribly inhumane things that were done by these people to others, and also to themselves. Please remember that half of the Crusades weren't even against Muslims. They were against other Christians to consolidate power at home in Europe. One group in France, known as the Cathars, even had a crusade against them. I've also had many friends who speak French, although they are from Haiti and from West Africa. Some jackass will correct me and tell me, Technique, they speak Creole. Yes, they speak that too. They are my friends. I know them, you don't. They speak French as well. Sorry. They love many things about France, but their reaction at anyone's notion that they were civilized by a French colonial power is about the same reaction you would get from Polish Jews if you suggested that Germans provided them with free housing in the 30s and 40s. Understanding the complexity of the difficult history of a nation involves critical thinking, not oversimplified answers. Unfortunately, when horrific things like yesterday's terrorist attack on Paris happen, we typically get a few hundred new political science experts, brand spanking new Middle Eastern policy experts. Never mind that these people's only understanding of foreign policy is a blurb on a propaganda channel or Fox News in a fake situation room on CNN. You know, the place where things happen in a vacuum and there's no historical component. Every racist YouTube scholar then crawls out of the woodwork to tell you how wicked Islam is, or how the French are weak and they need more guns. Nonsense like, if the little boy that was shot in Paris had a gun, he'd be alive today. Shake my head. Pathetic. Sometimes it's harder to argue with these people for the same reason it's easier and much quicker to trash a room than to actually arrange it clean it neatly. These are people that look for quick, easy solutions to problems that aren't solved that way. First of all, the French aren't weak. They're a nuclear power with satellites and advanced technology. They just have a lot more reserve to use military force. They chose, I repeat, they chose not to come to Iraq in 2003 because it wasn't their slice of the Middle East. After the Sykes-Picot partition of the Middle East, England took the Arabian Peninsula, Transjordan, which included Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, future Kuwait, and Kurdish settlements gathered on the borders. Russia gained the Caucasus when she helped the European allies rip apart the Ottoman Empire after World War I. But France, for its role, received what is now modern-day Syria and Lebanon, and later gained a free hand in North Africa. I saw the historical evidence. Why else would Britain refuse to go into Syria when we were ready, and France balk Iraq? France has been involved in just about every global conflict since the Romans defeated Attila the Hun. We mocked them with freedom fries as if they were cowards, and I was disgusted by the sheer ignorance of people here in the USA who don't understand that they helped us with our own independence. Some people always tend to point out that we paid them back in World War II. Point taken. I always thought this sort of blemishing of their nation, though at the time, was childish and sad, especially considering that we have, or could have had, more than 4,000 American soldiers alive, tens of thousands not injured, and God knows how many hundreds of thousands of Iraqis alive if we hadn't been lied to as a nation to invade Iraq. There would also be no ISIS. The attitude towards France also bothered me back then because I knew the history of their once raging empire and their colonial republic. I know the French are a strong people. I know they are resilient. They have all sorts of people there. Some well off, some hanging on. I have been to the nicest places, and I've also seen the spots where poor people are just struggling to get by, just like we do here. I not only pray for their safety, I also pray for them to not succumb to the false prophets. I just hope they don't allow the fear-mongering idiot bashers who just scare low information voters to take over their nation. The guilty people should be captured. Those that sponsor them too. But that's where this gets really fucked up. Who sponsors ISIS? I wish to discuss this Syria-ISIS connection in two parts, philosophically and tangibly. I tell a funny story at shows about a person who I was arguing with that said that ISIS were the biggest threat to human society. I responded that I thought ISIS was a significant danger, but what was it that really made this person think they were so horrible? What did they specifically know about this group, in other words? They responded, they are enslaving people, stealing their land, and forcing them to convert to their religion, and that's just un-American. Failing to see their obvious irony in what they just said, it led to a much larger conversation. In keeping with the metaphor of arguing with people, see how quickly you can ruin a room and make it messy, with simple failed logic, and how for a while we talked, it took much longer to clean that room. France is not an isolated issue at all. Days earlier there was an attack in Beirut and Baghdad that were not as highly publicized, and now this insane amount of carnage in Paris. I have seen a great outpouring of support for the people of Paris. That is so beautiful, but also so sad to reflect and think about how people in other places endure violence that is so normalized that we have been trained to not even pay any attention to it. Ask yourself why. Then there are cries about a hidden agenda behind this. I'm not here to discuss conspiracy with you. We have too many facts to cover, and this is already too long, although I can understand why some people react to this news cynically. It's not that they don't feel sorry for the people who died in France, and those who are left behind to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They just see a double standard, that when people die in mass attacks in Africa or the Middle East, we in the West don't react with as much empathy and action as when Europe or the US is attacked. I mourn all human loss. I post as much as I can on all my different social media sites, and I'm using this post to not just discuss France, but outlying issues that affect the topic of terrorism. But because I express condolences instead of people looking at this as a human condition that we are all connected to, someone even had the nerve to ask me why I cared about these people alive and not others. You think the social construct of putting one person's life above another in media isn't lost on me? Really? You really think the love for two could not coexist in the heart that pumps the same blood we all have? Stop it. The other reason this isn't an isolated issue isn't just because of the past. Many haven't even stopped to consider that this is now going to lead to more war and much more death. We are well aware of the protocol now that this has happened. Since ISIS has come forward to quickly take credit and since it is now operating out of Syria and Iraq. A lot of people see this as an excuse for the USA and France to enter Syria again. We saw President Obama earlier in his presidency make an unsuccessful plea, even to go so far as to reach out his proxy army in the media to push this idea of invading Syria. It's easy to see that everything has a moral to the story. If this terrorist attack only leads to the death of more innocents and the annexation of another soon-to-be vassal state in the Middle East, then how could anyone not be cynical? After all, that would be a disgrace to the people in Paris that died to use their deaths as a meal ticket for weapons companies and agents of empire. I understand that people are angry at our government. It does the wrong thing often for selfish reasons. It turns a blind eye to some of the nations in which people are radicalized, simply because they are our allies and help push the economic agenda in the region. The Arab Spring was a farce not just because of what any news agency has tried to point out, but most royal families, except Iran's, who were put in place by Europe after World War I, got to keep their crowns in the Middle East. Maybe a reward for their obedience. Most of the military strongmen who won their crown by coup or military force are either now gone or out. Now, if that's a fact, am I lying? Saddam, Mubarak, Gaddafi, now Assad? The Arab Spring could easily be characterized as cleanup for the Bush Doctrine. It was believed by its people at first to be an expression of democracy, but democracy is what the West fears most in the Middle East. The people will vote in favor of their own interests, and not in the royals' interests, and not in yours, in their interests. I have to interrupt here and just remind you that since 1776, a significant number of times that we have been to war, it hasn't been because we were attacked as a nation, it's because our interests were being threatened. That literally means that people organizing for better work conditions who get in the way of our companies making money fall into this category. Now you see why in the 20th century we practice so much regime change. ISIS in Syria. Okay, let's talk about how some of you people who are reading this, not the majority of you, but a small amount, think that because I said the Iraq war was full of lies and that the feds were tapping our phones, that I deal in conspiracy. No, kids, that's just a last-ditch attempt to avoid the conversation about facts. Here briefly is what's not a conspiracy theory. Assad, who had been in power for decades in Syria, had a significant percentage of his organic population unhappy with his rule. During the farce we now know as the Arab Spring, many people rose up in protests. When this happened elsewhere, the absolute ruler of Jordan, who under Western advisement sacked a huge part of his government to appease the populace. A clever political strategy to distract us all from the fact that he's still a king ordained by God to have power over the lives of others. Assad was different though. He met his people with repression, not giving in to demands. This was actually before he accused Western powers of being involved in what was first propaganda but quickly turned into armed conflict that if it happened in our country we would call terrorism. Then, when it became obvious that the violence between his faction and a dissatisfied and repressed people would continue, many people formed groups to oppose him, and this is where the infiltration began. This is where the USA, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Turkey, France, Qatar, and a few others come in. The cast of a new Peruvian cocaine, so to speak, in order to topple Assad. Factor in the war weariness of America. They decided not just to support small factions of rebels, they also chose to sponsor mercenaries. These were the type of people for whom the war, whichever war you take your pick here, never ended. The sad part is that we, meaning the governments above and others, logistically supported them and paid them handsomely to commit what was branded a jihad. This is also speculative, as many people who were hired were not necessarily fanatics, they just had military training and were jobless. Israel is even documented as giving some of these troops medical aid near the Golan Heights. Ironically, this would mean that people who were linked to the splinter cells of Al Qaeda and ISIS were paid and treated in hospitals by us or our allies. This is precisely why this is a clusterfuck and no one understands it. Bullshit. It's not a secret that many of the kingdoms who helped sponsor and supply these mercenaries decided that they would try and topple another leader who they felt wasn't in their camp. I tread carefully here, because I have trusted many friends from Syria, and it is important for me to point out that a large percentage, but not all, anti-Assad forces are paid fighters. Many are organic Syrian Resistance. They were the ones that were originally opposed to the legacy dictator, and yet now, sadly, they can consider their cause beyond hijacked. If the opposition is being told that a Western-backed military dictator in Syria is the only option left, then are they fighting a revolution or fighting to replace the jewels in the king's crown? The type of people who cut out hearts and kill little kids, they are always hiding amongst fighting men in plain sight. Yes, they must have mental deficiency, but they are not there solely for the belief in religion. Islam condemns everything they are doing, and every Muslim that yells God's name in violence, a billion say it in praise and peace every day. We cannot lose sight of that. When a soldier says the Lord's Prayer and goes into battle, is Christianity at fault for the lives he has taken? However, people that kill other people for financial compensation, they have actually traded their soul for money. That is being pumped from here to topple a man we want out of power. What would Jesus do? No, seriously, would he spit in your face like he flipped over the money tables? No, France's tragedy isn't our fault, or theirs. Certainly not the innocent people themselves. It's the fault of people who we and they and others helped arm, trying to get rid of someone who we couldn't use our own military on because our people have had enough of the war out there. It's the fault of those people who were not considered a threat when they were working for us, but they are now a grave danger that calls for invasion. Does this story sound familiar to you? The fault belongs to the terrorists and murderers whose agenda is clouded in government secrets, to the fallen religious leaders who take money for creating zealot children to be manipulated. It is a lack of vision on behalf of our own government, thinking that you could control people with money. These groups and mercenaries know that eventually you will all leave and that a bomb exploding in the part of the world won't matter to you as much as one in New York or Paris. But a bomb goes off here and you attack them back and innocent people will die, which they always will, because drones are only 90% effective. Others will be drawn into the fight they want, which is a collision of two worlds. They wish to push an agenda which ironically benefits the consolidation of power rather than their own liberation. It is the nearsightedness of these people in power who hire people like this without giving a single afterthought to the horror that will occur when the war is over, and that these people are roaming free. However, the sad part is that the cynics are correct in one thing. There was not this much outcry over just as many killed in other places. As for the radicalization of Islam, I will end by saying that this is something we are no stranger to. There is documented evidence of us doing that in many places, but I remember Afghanistan the best. Telling them the Russians would ban the Quran, and this is about protecting their country from godless communism. Gone were the miniskirts and bell-bottoms of the early 1970s. A nation that was a legitimately moderate Islamic nation, who the elders there remember so clearly, plunged into a chaos, sectarian violence and ethnic cleansing. We only cared about giving Russia their Vietnam in the mountains of Central Asia. Just be honest with yourselves for a moment. The sting of false national pride for the things we shouldn't be proud of goes away quickly. Now, here, we have a history repeating itself. We are giving money and training and weapons to people that the Gulf states and other regional players find, who we calm ourselves by telling them moderates. The truth is, our government didn't give a fuck who they were. If they are willing to kill our enemies, the ones who want to hurt our interests, see, that's what cannot come out of this. This sort of thinking needs to change. If we just hunt them down and kill them, take over their country and set up shop just so we can sell Starbucks to them, that's not a victory, that's not justice. I am heartbroken for those people who have died, for those who have had to pick their children up off the street, who had to go home soaked in blood and tell their mother that their brother, sister, mother or father wasn't coming home. I'm heartbroken for these people, and now I am equally heartbroken for the people of Paris, who have to do the same thing. All we can do is try and stop the cycle, but my heart is already breaking for all the others, innocents who will die soon. We are all one human race. Maybe some people have forgotten that, but I haven't. Bon nuit, peace and respect, Felipe, Coronel, Immortal Technique. So, what are your thoughts on Immortal Technique's opinion on the Paris attacks? And what do you feel he is correct in his markings about the ISIS group and the terror that is being brought? And are we watching history repeat itself? Let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.